Late September 1942. Picture this: a dimly lit conference room deep within Hitler's fortress headquarters in the forests of East Prussia. The air itself feels heavy, not just with cigarette smoke, but with something far more dangerous. Tension. The kind that makes your chest tight and your palms sweat. Arranged around an enormous wooden table sit Germany's military elite, each man wearing an immaculate uniform, each face frozen in studied neutrality. They know what's coming. They can feel it. At one end of this table sits Adolf Hitler himself. Standing directly before him is General Franz Halder, the man who serves as chief of the German General Staff. Halder has held this crucial position since 1938, navigating Germany through its lightning victories across Poland, its stunning conquest of France, its domination of the Low Countries. He's been instrumental in crafting the invasion strategies that transformed Germany into the undisputed master of continental Europe. But today? Today is different. Today, Halder is about to commit what amounts to professional suicide in the Third Reich. He's about to do something almost no one dares to do anymore. He's going to tell Adolf Hitler that he's wrong. The topic on the table is Stalingrad, that brutal, grinding battle consuming the German Sixth Army. For over 8 weeks now, General Friedrich Paulus and his forces have been locked in savage urban warfare throughout this Soviet industrial complex sprawling along the Volga River. They're fighting for every street corner, every basement, every pile of rubble. Progress isn't measured in kilometers anymore. It's measured in meters, sometimes just in rooms. And the price? The human cost is becoming astronomical. Halder has spent weeks analyzing the numbers. He's done the calculations over and over, hoping somehow the math would change. It hasn't. He begins his presentation methodically, laying out the harsh realities that everyone in this room knows, but no one wants to acknowledge. The Sixth Army has hemorrhaged over 80,000 men since August began, killed, wounded, or missing. Meanwhile, Soviet reinforcements keep streaming across the Volga under cover of darkness, seemingly endless waves of fresh troops. Germany's supply lines have been stretched like a rubber band pulled to its breaking point, extending hundreds upon hundreds of kilometers across the open steppe. Territory where Soviet partisan fighters grow bolder by the day, ambushing convoys and sabotaging railways. And looming over everything: winter. The Russian winter is approaching, and the army remains woefully unprepared. Then Halder speaks the words that will end his career. Mein Führer, we cannot capture Stalingrad with our current force allocation. The expenditure of men and material will far exceed any strategic advantage we might gain. My professional recommendation is to consolidate our current positions, establish proper winter defensive lines, and resume offensive operations. Next spring, when we have adequate supplies and reinforcements. The silence that crashes down upon the room is total. Absolute. You could hear a pin drop. Every general, every colonel in that room understands precisely what Halder has just done. He has directly contradicted the Führer. He has suggested, no, recommended retreat. He has essentially declared that Hitler's strategic vision is fundamentally flawed. In Nazi Germany, these aren't just career-ending statements. They might very well be life-ending statements. Watch Hitler's face flush crimson. When he finally speaks, his voice emerges quiet and controlled, which anyone who knows him understands is far more terrifying than his infamous ranting and screaming. You recommend withdrawal. The words hang in the air like an accusation. You, who have presided over every retreat, every setback, every disappointment of this campaign. You, who have constantly advocated for caution and hesitation while I have delivered victory after victory after victory. This is the defining moment of Halder's military career. He could backtrack now. He could apologize, soften his words, qualify his statements with enough hedging to maybe, possibly save his position. Or he could push forward with the complete, unvarnished truth, knowing full well it will destroy him professionally. He chooses truth. Mein Führer, I have examined the logistical situation exhaustively. The Sixth Army requires approximately 700 tons of supplies every single day to maintain combat effectiveness. On our best days, our absolute best days, we manage to deliver perhaps 300 tons. As winter conditions deteriorate, that number will only decrease further. The Soviet forces defending Stalingrad show no signs of collapsing. Our intelligence consistently indicates they are preparing a massive counteroffensive, most likely targeting our flanks, which, I must emphasize, are currently held by Romanian and Italian units equipped with grossly inadequate anti-tank capabilities. If we persist in concentrating our forces inside Stalingrad itself, while ignoring this threat, we risk the complete encirclement of the entire Sixth Army. Here's what makes Halder's assessment even more damning. He's not offering vague, generalized concerns that could be dismissed as pessimism. He's presenting meticulously detailed analysis, backed by concrete numbers and intelligence reports. He's using facts, logistics, and mathematical certainty to challenge ideology and force of will. Hitler rises from his seat. The rage is no longer contained. You dare to lecture me about what is possible and impossible, who have accomplished what every so-called expert declared impossible, who conquered France in 6 weeks when your precious general staff predicted it would require years, who have elevated Germany from the humiliation of defeat to the absolute mastery of Europe. Halder attempts to respond. Mein Führer, I'm not questioning your past achievements. I'm simply presenting the mathematical reality. Mathematical reality. Hitler's voice explodes now, his self-control shattered. Always you speak of mathematics, of logistics, of caution. Wars are won by willpower, by determination, by the absolute refusal to accept defeat. The Bolsheviks are teetering on the edge of total collapse. Anyone can see it. Stalingrad is the key to everything. Once that city falls, the entire Soviet position along the Volga disintegrates. We will control the river. We will control access to the Caucasus oil fields. We will win this war. But at what cost? Halder's voice rises now, too, despite his best efforts to remain professional. Even if we somehow manage to capture Stalingrad, which will require at least another month of this horrific urban warfare, we'll be left with a completely exhausted army occupying an impossibly exposed position deep inside Soviet territory. Winter will be upon us, and our supply lines cannot possibly sustain operations in those conditions. Enough! Hitler's fists slam down on the table with such force that water glasses jump. I am surrounded, absolutely surrounded by pessimists and defeatists, by men who see only obstacles where I see opportunities, by generals who want to retreat at the first sign of genuine resistance. You, Halder, have been an anchor dragging down this army's potential from the very beginning. You opposed the attack on France. You opposed the invasion of the Soviet Union. You have opposed every bold, decisive action that has led to German victory, and now you oppose Stalingrad. The accusation carries some truth. Halder had indeed expressed reservations about many of Hitler's most aggressive decisions, but he'd also helped execute those decisions, often with considerable brilliance. The problem is that Hitler remembers only the objections, never the successes. In Hitler's mind, anyone who questions him is inherently wrong, because he himself can never be wrong. Around the table, other officers shift uncomfortably in their seats. Several of them privately agree with Halder's assessment. Field commanders on the Eastern Front have been sending eerily similar reports about overstretched supply lines and exhausted troops. But not one of them will speak up. They've all learned the same hard lesson. Agreeing with criticism of Hitler's strategy is immediate career suicide. Halder makes one final desperate attempt. Mein Führer, I have served Germany faithfully. You have served your own timidity. You have served outdated, obsolete general staff thinking. You have not served the vision that Germany requires. I need generals who believe in victory, not accountants who spend their time counting costs. Hitler turns sharply to Field Marshal Wilhelm Keitel, his most unquestioningly loyal subordinate. Halder is relieved of command as Chief of the General Staff, effective this moment. He will be replaced by General Kurt Zeitzler. Perhaps a younger officer with actual Eastern Front combat experience will possess the aggressive spirit this position demands. Halder reaches up and removes the insignia from his collar, placing them carefully on the polished table surface. He'd known this moment was coming the instant he decided to speak honestly. He delivers one final formal salute and walks out of that room. His military career, everything he's worked for, is finished. He'll spend the remainder of the war in forced retirement, eventually arrested following the July 1944 assassination attempt against Hitler, despite having no direct involvement. But as he walks down that corridor, leaving the conference room behind, Halder knows something crucial. He was right. Every calculation he made, every concern he voiced, every warning he delivered was accurate. And over the next 4 months, reality will prove him correct in the most horrific way imaginable. The Soviet counteroffensive he predicted with such precision launches exactly 8 weeks later. On November 19, 1942, massive Soviet forces smash into the Romanian positions both north and south of Stalingrad, exactly as Halder warned they would. The Romanian units, equipped with inadequate anti-tank weapons and holding thinly stretched defensive lines, collapse within mere hours. By November 23rd, the unthinkable has occurred. The entire German Sixth Army is completely encircled. Over 280,000 men, an entire army, trapped inside the very city Hitler insisted must be captured at any cost. The supply crisis Halder calculated with mathematical precision materializes exactly as he predicted. The Luftwaffe attempts to supply the surrounded pocket by air, but never comes remotely close to delivering the required 700 tons daily. Most days they deliver 100 tons or less. Many days, virtually nothing gets through. Inside the pocket, soldiers begin to starve. Equipment fails from lack of fuel and spare parts. Medical supplies run out completely. Men freeze to death in inadequate winter shelters, their uniforms never designed for Russian winter conditions. The Sixth Army commanders, trapped in that frozen pocket, send increasingly desperate messages requesting permission to attempt a breakout, while it remains even theoretically possible. Hitler refuses every single request. He's remembering Halder's advice about withdrawal, and he's determined to prove that willpower can overcome logistics. He orders the Sixth Army to hold their positions regardless of cost. They must maintain discipline. They must fight to the last bullet. They must never surrender. The result is arguably the most catastrophic military defeat in German history. By the time General Paulus finally surrenders in February 1943, fewer than 90,000 men remain alive out of the original 280,000. And of those survivors, only about 5,000 will ever return home from Soviet captivity. Meanwhile, Franz Halder sits in his forced retirement, keeping detailed journals. He records his frustration at having been proven right while being treated as if he were wrong. He documents the precise ways his predictions materialized. And he reflects deeply on the fundamental problem that destroyed him, and that will ultimately destroy Germany. The problem, he realizes, is that Hitler has created a system where truth is whatever he decides it is. Facts that contradict his vision are automatically dismissed as defeatism. Officers who present accurate assessments are accused of lacking fighting spirit. The entire military command structure has been corrupted by one toxic principle: tell Hitler what he wants to hear rather than what he needs to know. Halder tried to be the exception. He tried to maintain professional military standards: honest assessment, realistic planning, truthful reporting. But in Hitler's Germany, professional competence has become subordinate to ideological loyalty. It's better to be wrong and loyal than right and critical. The yes men survive and get promoted. The truth-tellers are purged. General Kurt Zeitzler, who replaces Halder, is initially more aggressive and optimistic in his assessments, which Hitler naturally appreciates. But within just a few months, Zeitzler finds himself presenting the exact same concerns about Stalingrad that Halder had voiced. The difference? By then, the army is already trapped. Zeitzler's belated honesty comes too late to prevent disaster, only to document it as it unfolds. Hitler's response to Zeitzler proves identical to his response to Halder. Dismissal of concerns, accusations of defeatism, insistence that willpower will prevail. Zeitzler lasts longer than Halder managed, but eventually he too is dismissed after repeatedly requesting permission for strategic retreats that might have saved substantial German forces. He suffers a complete nervous breakdown in 1944 and is removed from command. This pattern repeats itself throughout the remaining years of the war. Competent generals who tell Hitler the truth get fired. Sycophants who tell him what he wants to hear get promoted. German military operations become increasingly divorced from strategic reality, decisions made in a fantasy world rather than responding to actual conditions on the ground. Field Marshal Erich von Manstein, perhaps Germany's most genuinely capable general, manages this delicate balance better than most. He learns to present realistic assessments, but frames them carefully to avoid directly contradicting Hitler. He requests flexible defense rather than retreat. He emphasizes strategic repositioning rather than withdrawal. This semantic game sometimes works, but it also means that even Germany's finest military minds are wasting precious energy managing Hitler's ego rather than fighting the war effectively. The tragedy of Halder's firing wasn't simply that Germany lost a capable staff officer. The real tragedy is the message it sent throughout the Wehrmacht. Telling the Führer the truth is more dangerous than losing battles. This creates an atmosphere where officers at all levels learn to distort or suppress information that might anger Hitler. Intelligence reports are softened, casualty figures are minimized, enemy strength is underestimated, supply problems are downplayed. Every officer from company commander to field marshal learns to shape information to fit what they believe Hitler wants to hear. This systematic distortion flows upward through the entire command structure, meaning Hitler makes strategic decisions based on increasingly fictional assessments of reality. He's making choices about where to attack, where to defend, how to allocate resources, all based on what his subordinates think he wants to hear rather than what is actually happening on the battlefields. This information gap widens steadily throughout the war, contributing to catastrophically poor decisions in 1943, 1944, and 1945. The Battle of Kursk, the failure to adequately prepare for the Normandy invasion, the pointless Battle of the Bulge offensive, the delusional defense of Berlin. All of these disasters flow partly from the same root cause: a leader who punished truth-telling and rewarded comfortable lies. Stalingrad becomes the perfect symbol of this dysfunction. Hitler insisted the city could be captured because he needed it captured for political and psychological reasons. Halder said it couldn't be captured, or at least not at acceptable cost, because the logistics fundamentally didn't support it. Halder was fired for this assessment. And then reality proved Halder correct in the most catastrophic way imaginable. But even after Stalingrad, Hitler doesn't learn. He doesn't recognize that firing advisors for telling the truth was counterproductive. Instead, he doubles down. The defeats must have been caused by incompetent or treasonous generals. The solution is to exert even more personal control, to rely even less on professional military advice, to trust his intuition over expert analysis. This pattern continues straight through to the end. In 1944, when Allied forces land in Normandy, Hitler refuses to release panzer reserves because he's convinced the landing is a feint and the real invasion will come at Calais. His generals know better, but they've learned not to contradict him too forcefully. By the time Hitler accepts that Normandy is the main invasion, it's too late to effectively counterattack. In 1945, as Soviet forces close in on Berlin itself, Hitler is still moving phantom divisions around on maps, issuing orders to armies that no longer exist, planning counteroffensives with resources that were destroyed months earlier. His staff knows the situation is utterly hopeless, but they continue executing meaningless orders because they've learned that truth-telling is punished, while obedient failure is merely unfortunate. Halder survives the war. He's actually arrested by American forces, then used as a historical consultant on German military operations. He provides extensive testimony about the dysfunctional relationship between Hitler and the General Staff. He explains how professional military planning was systematically subordinated to ideological fantasy. He documents the precise mechanisms by which Hitler's refusal to accept reality led to strategic disasters. In his later writings, Halder reflects on his firing with deeply mixed feelings. On one hand, being proven right offers cold comfort when hundreds of thousands of men died unnecessarily as a result of decisions he opposed. On the other hand, he maintained his professional integrity when it would have been far easier and infinitely safer to simply go along with the delusion. He told the truth when truth-telling was dangerous, and he paid the full price for it. The lesson of Halder's firing extends far beyond military history. It's a case study in what happens when any institution prioritizes loyalty over competence, when criticism is treated as betrayal, when leaders surround themselves exclusively with yes men rather than experts willing to deliver uncomfortable news. The pattern is recognizable across different eras of history and across vastly different types of organizations. Leaders who punish truth-tellers inevitably create systems where truth becomes increasingly rare. Subordinates learn to tell leaders what they want to hear rather than what they need to know. Important decisions get made based on comfortable fictions rather than uncomfortable facts. And eventually, reality asserts itself, usually in catastrophic ways that could have been prevented if someone had been willing to listen to the Halders of the world. September 24, 1942, was the day Hitler fired his best general for telling the truth about Stalingrad. But it was also the day Hitler guaranteed that Stalingrad would become the catastrophe Halder predicted. Because by removing the one senior advisor willing to speak honestly, Hitler ensured that no one else would dare try. The truth about Stalingrad became unspeakable. And an unspeakable truth led directly to an unspeakable tragedy. Franz Halder lived until 1972, long enough to see Germany rebuilt from the ashes, to see the Wehrmacht's reputation partially rehabilitated among historians, to see scholars recognize that he had been absolutely right about Stalingrad. But he also lived long enough to understand a harder truth: that being right had mattered less than being believed. That telling the truth had cost him everything professionally, while systematic lying had cost Germany something far more precious: hundreds of thousands of lives, and ultimately, the war itself. The firing of Franz Halder wasn't merely a personnel decision. It was a choice between reality and fantasy, between professional competence and ideological purity, between honest assessment and comfortable delusion. Hitler chose wrong, and 280,000 men at Stalingrad paid the ultimate price for that choice. The question that haunts history is this: how many other disasters, in that war and in countless other contexts, could have been prevented if leaders had valued truth over loyalty, if experts had been encouraged rather than punished for delivering unwelcome news. If reality had been allowed to shape decisions rather than being forced to conform to ideology, we'll never know. But we do know this. Every time a leader surrounds themselves with yes men, every time truth-telling becomes dangerous, every time reality is dismissed as defeatism, the ghost of Franz Halder stands in that conference room, presenting his careful calculations one more time, knowing he's right, knowing he'll be ignored, and knowing that thousands will die because of it.